news contributor who rang the alarm bells back in January about how devastating the coronavirus could be in America. He joins us now from D.C. Hey, Tom. So
Hi,
we all know the craziness. I'm good. Everybody knows the craziness we've been living with and what's been coming out of the White House. Can you explain to me what you think should be happening, what should be going on right now? As a former Homeland Security advisor, what do you think should be happening right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the best way to say it is a public health expert, friend of mine, he says it this way: we have a second bite at the apple that we can take. You know, we're talking a lot about the first bite at the apple and whether we did it fast enough and well enough. But now the second bite of the apple is to try to, at the end of April, step away from all of these restrictions in a smart fashion so that we don't reignite and have a second outbreak. And I think that's going to require a whole galvanization, a whole movement of people. You know, think about how big our country is and think about how large of a mobilization of people it will take to do wide-scale testing. And we don't have enough testing yet. And to do wide-scale contact tracing, to trace back everybody who's sick to everyone they've been in contact with and everybody they've been in contact with. And think about doing that plus testing people to see who's already been sick with the serum antibody test. And then put it all together in a way that allows us to come back out instead of in a blind fashion, but in an informed fashion, and in a way that allows some towns and cities to come out before others. And that's going to require us to use these 30 days in a way that's really, really almost a mobilization to war that we've been talking about. And so I think some people are starting to think, well, just 30 more days to recovery, and then when we're done, we'll all come back out. But I think that's a mistake.
I think you're right. It's overwhelming. You know, you were sounding the alarm about this back in January when you tweeted that the coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, China was going to be a global health threat. Now, we know that intelligence reports from January and February seemingly were ignored by the Trump administration. So why didn't they take this threat seriously in the first place? And wouldn't that have prevented this enormous number of people who are dying and who are projected to die because of this virus?
Yeah, one of the things that me and all the other people that I've worked on this with for the last 20 years really have struggled with is how to explain this, not only to public officials and leaders, but to people. It's so foreign to people. You know, we started out by saying this is like an iceberg and you're only seeing the tip of it, but that didn't really register. And then we said it's like looking at a star, you know, that principle of the light you see and that star left it years ago. But then, you know, that didn't quite work. A little too poetic, they told me. And then we finally stumbled on fire because it grows exponentially and people are familiar with it and they don't think it's a panic-inducing thing. You know, when there's a small fire on your stove, you yell fire because there's still time to do something about it. And people understand that, they can see it. In this case, when some of the public health officials were yelling fire by equivalent, a lot of people looked around and didn't see any evidence of anything on fire. It was hard to kind of internalize that we might have exponential growth, things that don't grow linearly, but rather by functions of 10. You know, I still don't think people really have their heads wrapped around that. The number of deaths in New York, tragically, are going to go up, I think. I don't predict this, but it's the properties of the virus. Would suggest those death tolls are going to go up considerably. And so once you get past that and you try to educate people to things that are kind of not normal to see and to hear and to learn, then you have to move into the second question of, well, wouldn't that have prevented? And I'm not so sure that that's true. So on that front, we're going to have to wait and see a little bit on how things happened and when. It looks like, although there could have been more, it looks like we had this kind of global blanket, you know, national shutdown in time to prevent a lot of spread in a lot of communities, sans New York and parts of California. So it'll be a mixed bag on what we could have done and what would have achieved.
Tom, President Trump has defended his efforts in battling the coronavirus outbreak. The administration has often given itself, I think it was like a 10 out of 10. What do you think are the things that he did get right?
Well, you know, one of the things that we got right together as a country was this complete embracing of, and not everybody followed it, but the notion of leaders embracing this social distancing practice. You know, remember from 1918 until 2007, the world presumed that the lesson from the 1918 flu was that there's nothing you can do about it, that it's futile. And a lot of really smart people, and I was blessed to be able to work with them back in 2005, 6, and 7, said, we'd like to challenge that. And they decided that they'd look at each city instead of the whole country as a monolith. And they decided it wasn't a tale of two cities, Philadelphia and St. Louis, but it was a tale of many cities. And that those cities that did things early enough and aggressively enough and in a layered fashion, they achieved a different, better outcome. And so when they realized that, they had this paper they published, and that was the strategy that we're following today. It was published in 2007. And we didn't, for a number of reasons, implement it in time in a country our size and scale with 340 million people. But the idea of my second bite at the apple is to take it and apply those principles as we back out of this. So I think the history on this objectively will indicate that we kind of reduced the spread from what we would have expected. Probably 20% on a first wave of our populace could have been infected. That's 66 million sick people, into something closer to 5 or 6% of our population infected. That's still a really high number, and none of this is good or positive news or meant to defend anybody, frankly. But I think that the social distancing we put in place, when we put it in place, achieved a significant reduction. It's certainly not enough, and it's certainly going to overwhelm our hospital systems, and it's tragic to watch this play out.
Talking about hospital systems, several states are warning that in a few weeks they will be out of supplies. And President Trump has said that the national stockpile of medical equipment, respirators, masks, ventilators, is nearly depleted. Why is he not utilizing the Defense Production Act so that businesses are just forced to replenish those supplies?
Yeah, the Defense Production Act is key. But its use is the harder part, right? I've had some experience with this. This is a massive, complicated logistics challenge at this point. And, Governor Newsom and others will tell you that it's not just about large-scale purchasing. It's about deciding who needs it and whose priorities should trump others, because this is a scarcity of resource problem at this point. We're kind of past what we would have, could have, and should have done, and we're having now to make decisions about who gets what, when, and why. And that's the trick. To be really honest with you, I'd be using the Defense Production Act at this point, not in the priorities and allocations implications. Those are the two authorities that we all talk about every day. We should use them more aggressively. Don't centralize them in the White House. Distribute those authorities. That would be my advice to the president. I spent a lot of time, trust me, on this. I'd be using it for something in addition, and that is to get us thinking now about ramping up the capacity to produce all the vaccine that we're going to need. Once a vaccine is viable, and there is one that works, we're going to have to make 340 million doses. And every other country is going to be making their vaccines for their people. So we can't depend on even our allies in that circumstance. So, if we're going to run into a good vaccine and no ability to mass produce it, or at least not quickly, we're going to extend this pain for, unnecessarily another 6 or 7 months. And I hope that doesn't happen.
So, thank you to Tom Bossert. We'll be right back.